Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Europe declared an energy war on Russia, but so far the main casualties are European industry, European taxpayers, and European households paying more for less energy. The official story is elegant: sanctions, green transition, strategic autonomy, moral victory. The real picture is simpler and less heroic. We replaced relatively cheap pipeline gas with expensive seaborne molecules, paid hundreds of billions to survive the shock, and locked ourselves into a structurally higher cost base for years ahead. Here is where the story stops making sense. Before 2022, the EU imported around 140 billion cubic meters of gas per year from Russia, roughly 40% of its total gas supply. By 2022, that dropped to about 60 billion cubic meters, and politically the goal is to get to zero by 2027. On paper, this looks like freedom from dependence. In practice, it meant tearing out the cheapest, most stable pillar of the European energy system and replacing it with spot-priced LNG and emergency deals at whatever price the market demanded. You can see it directly in the numbers. At the peak of the crisis in August 2022, the Dutch TTF benchmark hit around 340 euros per megawatt hour. That is more than 20 times the pre-crisis norm, when gas traded in the 10 to 20 euro range. Even after the panic passed, average wholesale prices in 2022 stayed several times higher than in 2021 and still remain well above the calm decade of the 2010s. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this: Europe did not replace Russian gas with green energy, it replaced Russian gas with higher priced gas. Physically, the system also changed. Pipeline gas is boring: steel, compression, long-term contracts, predictable flows. LNG is logistics on hard mode: liquefaction, tankers, regasification terminals, and constant bidding against Asia. Every step adds cost and volatility. In 2022 to 2023, LNG imports into Europe surged, with the United States becoming the dominant marginal supplier as cargoes were diverted from Asia into European ports. The US sells at Henry Hub, plus liquefaction, plus shipping, plus margin. Traders love it. European factories do not. To dampen the shock, European governments threw money at the problem. Between 2021 and 2023, energy-related support measures in the EU reached roughly 650 to 700 billion euros, with Germany alone accounting for more than 250 billion. Price caps, subsidies, rebates, protective shields, whatever the label, it is the same mechanism. The state borrows so that households and companies can pay bills that the energy system itself made unpayable. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV. At the same time, demand did not simply disappear because we posted a hashtag. In 2022, European gas consumption fell by a bit more than 10% versus 2021, helped by a mild winter, fuel switching, and demand destruction. In France, for example, gas demand dropped around 20% compared with the 2018 to 2019 average. Part of that is efficiency and conservation. Part of it is simply less economic activity, fewer kilns running, fewer shifts in energy-intensive plants. On the industrial side, you can already see the cost. Energy-intensive sectors in Germany, chemicals, basic metals, paper, are now operating well below their 2019 output levels, with some segments down by double digits. Some production has been cut permanently, some is temporarily idled, and some is now being relocated to regions with cheaper and more predictable energy. For an economy that built its model on export plus cheap pipeline gas, this is not a small adjustment, it is a structural downgrade. Now let's look at the players and what they actually want. For the EU leadership, the priority is political: reduce exposure to Russia, signal climate virtue, and keep the Union from fracturing under pressure. The narrative is: we survived without Russian gas, we diversified, we are resilient. In this narrative, the level of your electricity bill is a minor inconvenience. The key KPI is that no one froze and the lights stayed on. The problem is that industry does not work on narratives. It works on margins. For the United States, the setup is comfortable. European dependence on Russian gas is replaced by dependence on US and allied LNG, on US defense guarantees, and on US financial markets. American LNG producers and traders gained a premium market with urgent buyers. The US also benefits from some European industrial activity moving across the Atlantic, chasing lower energy costs and more predictable regulation. Officially, this is sold as cooperation and energy security. Functionally, it is export of molecules, hardware, and standards. Russia, of course, is not winning some genius chess game either. it has lost the bulk of its most profitable gas market. Gas production fell by around 20% in 2022, and rerouting everything to Asia will take years and massive capital. But crucially, Moscow does not care if European gas is expensive. In fact, high prices help compensate for lower volumes. When the EU screams from energy prices, this is not a bug for the Kremlin. It is a feature. Norway, North Africa, and a handful of other suppliers quietly benefit too. Every time pipeline gas from them replaces Russian volumes, it is sold into a market where the reference price is still anchored to those LNG spikes. Their production costs did not suddenly triple, their revenues did. And then we have the traders, large houses that arbitraged LNG cargoes between basins and profited enormously from the volatility. In 2022, TTF prices were described as 25 times higher than 2 years before, with distribution costs hitting 150 euros per megawatt hour at the peak. That spread between operational cost and panic price did not vanish into thin air. It landed in very specific balance sheets. Here is where the story stops making sense for ordinary people. For households in Europe, especially in smaller open economies like the Baltics, the outcome is simple. Structurally higher energy bills compared with the pre-2020 world. Even after temporary subsidies, average electricity and gas prices per kilowatt hour remain far above 2019 levels, and any new geopolitical shock can push them up again. The new normal is permanent uncertainty priced into your monthly bill. Real wages have not kept pace. Inflation in 2022 to 2023 eroded purchasing power, while median salaries did not magically jump 20 to 30% to match gas and electricity peaks. So families pay more for heating, for food produced in energy-intensive chains, for transport, and they finance this partly through savings and partly through quiet reduction in consumption. This is how macroeconomic shocks look from the kitchen, not from the conference stage. For small and medium-sized businesses, the trap is even tighter. If you run a bakery, a metal workshop, a logistics company, you do not have the pricing power of an energy major. You cannot hedge years ahead like a global conglomerate. You face more expensive electricity, higher fuel costs, and often higher rents, and you compete in markets where clients are also squeezed. Some survive by cutting staff and investment. Many simply close. That deindustrialization is not theoretical. It is a list of addresses. In the Baltics, we get the full cocktail: dependence on imported energy, exposure to Nord Pool price swings, and economies that live off transit services and relatively small industrial bases. Electricity price spikes hit households directly, but also ports, warehouses, ship repair yards, food processors. If you are in Lithuania, Latvia, or Estonia, you have probably already seen how one crazy month on the power market can wipe out the annual profit of a perfectly normal company. Taxes and public finances are the other part of the trap. Those 650 plus billion euros that governments used to cushion the crisis did not fall from the sky. They show up as higher public debt, higher interest costs, and in time, pressure either to raise taxes or to cut other spending. So you get the full cycle. We pay more for imported energy, then we pay again through taxes and inflation to cover the emergency packages that made that same energy affordable in the short term. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. The energy crisis bill did not disappear. It was just moved from the spot market to the public balance sheet. Where does China fit into this? Indirectly, but not insignificantly. When European buyers are forced to pay whatever it takes for LNG to keep their systems running, Asia watches and prices its own strategy. Chinese and other Asian buyers can shift between pipeline gas, coal, domestic production, and long-term LNG deals, while Europe stands in the spot market as a price taker. In a fragmented world with competing blocs, that is a weak position. From a higher level, we can describe the current European situation very simply. Sanctions plus rushed green rhetoric created an energy trap where the EU pays more, gets less physical security than it thinks, and transfers part of its industrial base and fiscal capacity outward. For Washington, this is acceptable collateral. For Moscow, it is a minor satisfaction. For Brussels, it is presented as strategic resilience. For the average European, it is just another bill. If you're in Germany or Poland, I'm curious how this looks from your side. Is this what energy independence was supposed to feel like? And if you're in Southern Europe, does this match your reality, or is it just another North European panic projected onto your energy bills? In the end, the problem is not that Europe decided to reduce dependence on Russian energy. The problem is that it did it chaotically under slogans, with no honest reckoning of cost, and with a naive belief that markets would magically solve the logistics of replacing a continental pipeline system overnight. They did solve it at a price. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones, and try to remember, slogans don't power grids, systems do.